the word help is overused. I like that what can I do or how can I assist you is so important. That can go a long way in making things easier for mom or your partner and also make things better for the family. Welcome to the Dad Central Show, the podcast that helps overwhelmed dads conquer stress, build confidence, and become the father their family brags about. Join Drew Solon, a leadership coach and father of 5, and Ed Gow Jr., a fatherhood advocate and contributor to the Good Men Project, as we guide you through the journey of fatherhood. We'll show you how to connect deeply with your family, manage your time and energy better, and master tools to become the dad you want to be. Let's get started. What if the way you're trying to help mom in your life is actually making things harder, not easier? Research shows that while partner support is one of the biggest predictors of maternal well-being, many moms report feeling undersupported even when dads think they're helping. That disconnect is what we're unpacking today. So if you're a dad who generally wants to show up well, but still hears, I feel overwhelmed, you don't get it, I shouldn't have to ask, this episode is for you. The reality is most dads aren't lacking effort, they're lacking clarity. Understanding what actually helps and what unintentionally adds stress can transform your relationship, reduce tension at home, and make partnering feel more like a team effort instead of a silent struggle. So today, we're going to be talking about another interesting subject, supporting moms well, what actually helps her and what doesn't. You're watching. So Drew, what do you think about this one today?
Important, but also I'd say it's a little bit tricky. I'm going to use the word delicate. And every person's situation is different, but I think the core principle behind this is teamwork and helping build a healthier relationship. And I think that's the core of it. And so what my goal is for any listener is that you identify what applies to you in your circumstance and see how it can benefit, and then try and apply one thing. And if some of the things that are shared don't necessarily align with your circumstance, or your partner and that's not necessarily going to land, that's for you to filter out and say, okay, I'm gonna take what works and I'm gonna leave the rest. Knowing that we can't be in everyone's circumstance or situation, but what we can do is we can share principles and our own personal stories and hope that there's some value that you're able to take from that.
Good stuff. So just a reminder, if you haven't been here before, if you've been often, you are watching and listening to Dad Central, a parenting podcast to reduce stress and build confidence in fatherhood. Our show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes care is the best of a man, and because when men care for themselves and others, there's a positive impact. So before we get started, Drew, you have some feedback to share with us.
Yeah, I just wanted to, comment. It's going to sound more self-promotion, but I think, Ed, we've been doing this for a while, and we've been sharing resources, building experiences and support for dads. And, we don't do this a lot, but we're doing good work, and people are gaining value from it. And so I think it's important that we start to recognize and share the impact that we're having with others. And so that if you're engaging with the podcast, we want you to know there could be more for you that we can offer, that we can help with. And so, I got this message from somebody who's been part of our Dad Mentor Father Leader community since 2024. He's been going through a very difficult circumstance all through that time. And I've connected with him individually as well outside of the Father Leader community. And so he sent me this message. And so he said, what I appreciate about you is you don't ignore or deny realities of the ups and downs. You give space. You've reminded me often to look at things, especially when I see something in her, he's talking to his daughter, that reminds me of someone else, and to approach her accordingly. It's a great insight you have. It cuts through a lot, and the focus becomes coming through it instead of wallowing in it while respecting the experience. And so what that meant to me is that, life and fatherhood can be challenging, but when we acknowledge those challenges, but also shift our focus to how do we grow or move past, or how do we heal, or how do we take the next step with support, we're able to do that. And the beneficiary are the people who rely on us or that we're in close relationship with. And so, I know that if you're engaged typically in the podcast or with Dad Central, you care about your fatherhood role, you care about the relationships with your children and or your partner, and you want to make them better. And so I think that just validates for me that, hey, we're doing good work and we're helping people achieving the goals that really matter to them. So I thought I'd share it.
Well said and well shared. Thank you so much. That incites you to say, we'd like to answer your questions about fatherhood during our show. So please email your questions to podcast@dadcentral.ca. And today we're going to break down some different areas. We're going to talk about the research. The research and reality. Also, what actually helps her. Then what doesn't help. And then reframing your role as a dad. So Drew, let's kick it off with research and reality.
Yeah, well, we know from some of the statistics that partner support, fathers, strongly impacts maternal mental health. And we also know that moms in particular, gross generalization maybe, but they carry this idea of the mental load, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago in our podcast. That's the invisible burden of kind of planning, remembering, anticipating, scheduling, all those things. And so moms often carry some of these invisible responsibilities. And so that is why we might see externally, hey, we're helping, right? We're here at home, or we're contributing, we're out working, and we're bringing, resources home, and when we're available for the kids, we'll play with them. But there's also sometimes more than that. And so that is best, when it's shared, the full responsibilities of family. And so I think that's really what we're trying to say, is that sometimes what's on its surface is not all that there is. And there's more. So just recognizing there might be more in your situation, or maybe you're already doing a ton. And I think I want to acknowledge this, is that often I've heard some stories of dads where it's, I'll say, the reverse. They carry an inordinate burden themselves, and they're not getting necessarily the support from their moms. And so that's why I think the principles that we're going to talk about are valuable for building a shared experience around the family, no matter what your partner situation is. And so, but if you're a dad and you recognize some of these things, this is how you can connect and support mom a little bit better. And that's what we're going to talk about next, right? What actually helps her. But yeah, you can also come in here too before we move on, if you like.
I want to add on some things that you've shared on and talk about that. I have conversations with a lot of dads, but I also have a conversation with a lot of moms. And this area of invisible responsibilities, there are things that we don't see. So don't think that everything is always on the surface. Again, that old phrase, you can't tell a book by its cover. So we have to acknowledge that our moms carry invisible responsibilities. We do as dads also, but we're focusing on the moms today. And I like the term you used, Drew, shared responsibilities. That's what we're aiming for. There's shared responsibilities. And again, some circumstances don't allow it. But in the circumstances that do allow it, getting rid of the invisible and making the invisible to shared.
Yeah.
That's what's going on in my mind today before we move on to our next conversation topic.
Yeah, there's a simple phrase I remember for hearing as a kid: many hands makes light work.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have two parents, maybe even grandparents involved, aunts, uncles, many hands makes the light work of the load of parenting.
Yeah, let's talk about what actually helps her, Drew.
Well, we got three ideas. One is ownership, not assistance. We talked about this process in a couple of weeks ago. Two is reducing the mental load, also similar to what we talked about. And then emotional support that lands. And this is one where I'd probably like to spend a little bit more time today, Ed, is that piece, because I think that's really powerful. And because we know that women really relish and value receiving that emotional support, and it really does grow the connection and the relationship stronger when we're able to do that well as men. And I would say, gross generalization, men are maybe not as trained or equipped or even comfortable with this idea of emotions or emotional support. And so we want to talk and equip you on how to do that as best as you can. So if we go back to number one, this idea of ownership really means, and what the example we gave a couple weeks ago is identify one core area of the family, and you are going to be fully responsible and take ownership for, meaning that you're not relying on another person or your partner to sort of remind you or to kind of ask you again, hey, can you help with this? It's you've got it. So an example might be, let's say, meal planning. Maybe you really enjoy that. And so your job is to basically plan the meals, communicate what the grocery needs might be, give a little bit of a schedule, and then be able to help support your partner if your partner is doing more of the meal prep. So with some of the meal prep, because you know what the plans are. But you don't have to, she doesn't have to ask you, she doesn't have to remind you, because you've got it down and nailed in. You built a system that works for yourself around this whole idea of meal planning. Just one example. It could be. And so you don't ask, well, what can I do or how can I help? You just simply say, I've got this next week. And then you start to communicate in advance. Next week, here's what I'm planning. How does that work for you? What are your thoughts? Is there any adjustments? And working together in the process of the meal planning. And then you fully then go about executing. And whether that's the various ways you do that in your relationship, that's fine. But it all starts and stops with you. And if it's going to be fulfilled, then you're the one who's taking the responsibility if anything does fall down. And then you make sure that you own that and communicate it with your partner. So that's ownership. You want to talk about reducing the mental load, Ed?
Yeah, let's talk about it, because Drew's given out a lot, so I want to give him a grace for a few seconds here. Talk about reducing the mental load. Anticipate needs. There are things that be proactive, things like appointments, supplies, schedules. Again, getting back, what can you do? What can you do to lighten mom's load? The little things come to big things. So if you can help with those little things, saying, hey, are there any appointments that I can help with in regards to the kids? Can I take the kids here? Do you need anything? What can I do? I think that phrase, what can I do, is so important. I'm getting to a point where the word help is overused. I like that. What can I do, or how can I assist you, is so important. And again, if you're around as a dad, and depending on the situation, take the initiative, be proactive, do something. Hey, the worst thing happened. Oh, that wasn't right. At least you showed the initiative. Again, action is so important. And that can go a long way in making things easier for mom or your partner, and also make things better for the family, right? Because we here at Dad Central, we want impact for fathers and their families. So that's how I just tied in there about taking that initiative and anticipating the needs. Anything else you want to add, Drew?
Nope.
Okay, let's go to number 3.
Yeah, this is. Yeah, sorry, Ed. Yeah, this is the one that I think matters the most. A couple simple points, and then we can maybe go back and forth between us on lived experiences. Listening without fixing. We are by nature often action takers, problem solvers. So we hear the need expressed from our partner, and we're like, okay, we'll just jump in and fix it or problem solve or tell them how to solve it. When all they want is a listening, empathetic ear. They need to know that you hear them, that you understand them, that you recognize that it might be challenging, or they might feel some other things around the whole circumstance. And the more that you can listen, understand, and empathize with them, that more than, I'd say, 95% of the time is all that is really required.
Drew, do I have permission?
Yeah.
Do I have permission to interrupt there? Your permission?
Yeah.
Lived experience. For a number of years, I worked as a program coordinator at Canada's only father-focused family center. Yes, Canada's only. And I think there's not that many around. And when I say that to people, they go, what? And that engaged me in having conversations with dads and moms. And many times when I had those solo conversations with the moms, the common thing was, I just want him to listen. I just want him to listen. I would go over, and like at least 75% of the conversations I had with moms, that was the baseline concern. I don't want judgment. I just want him to listen. I don't feel like I'm being heard. So I just wanted to slide in a real life example in that regards. So sorry to interrupt, but I thought I wanted to put it there instead of at the end.
Perfect. That's a lived experience right there. And the way that a person often feels heard is when you validate their emotions or you validate what they're saying instead of minimizing it, right? So when your partner brings something to you that feels heavy for them, you can validate by simply saying, wow, that sounds really heavy for you, or that sounds really challenging for you, or it sounds like you're having a hard time with those feelings or with that situation, and don't say anything else. You're beginning to validate that what they're saying you've heard, and you recognize that it's a big thing for them, even if you don't think it's big, even if you're like, man, the solution's clearly right here. That's not how you provide emotional support. You do it by simply using three phrases it sounds like, it seems like, or it looks like. And the more that you can simply use these phrases, or there's a technique called mirroring, where somebody says something to you and you essentially say the last three words they said, you essentially mirror those same three words. So the last three words somebody said is, so it really sucked. And you would just simply say, it really sucked. And you do it in a calm, sort of empathetic, not a patronizing, but it really sucked, or almost like curiosity. It really sucked. And that's mirroring. And then they'll be able to fill that in. So the more that you can simply control and manage your tendency to want to jump in, to fix, to problem solve, to minimize that, the more you suspend that and simply empathize and say, it sounds like, it seems like, it looks like, and then recognize, wow, I can see why you would be so upset about that. Or I can understand why this feels so hard for you. I can understand that, you're really struggling here. I get it. And that simply leave that. You're beginning to demonstrate and show them you understand them and that it matters to you and that you've heard them. And that's how you begin to offer more emotional support that lands and helps them feel, oh, okay, I got somebody with me in this, because that's really what they want to know.
Well, we didn't want to go this way, but we have to go this way. Dads, what doesn't help? Drew, what doesn't help?
Yeah, well, repeatedly asking the same questions over and over and over almost becomes badgering. So yes, it's good to ask questions, but if you're not necessarily getting the response to it, then it's time to leave that alone and then shift to something different. You had mentioned help has become overplayed. In my previous relationship, I had learned that asking the question, okay, so how can I help you right now, was actually a very powerful question to be applied in certain circumstances that snapped sort of trigger reaction, the person out of trigger reaction, and could see that I was there. So you're going to have to determine that out, but just continue repeatedly asking the same questions, not valuable. Doing tasks halfway or needing follow-up from other people, that's a recipe for frustration for a partner. Comparing workloads. Well, I've been working all day, like it was overtime, like I've been taking all this. That's not going to be helpful either. Or waiting to be told. So sort of just sitting back. Well, nobody tells me. I'm just going to hang out, take a break here. Waiting to be told instead of stepping in when you see there's a need doesn't help either.
Yeah, and I just want to add that doing any of these things adds to mom's already many times challenging load. So try to avoid these things and listen and learn, and then just take that initiative. You know, if you're, I have those moments where I do things halfway and it comes back to bite me in my butt. So do it. And also, I would say too, say what timeline you're going to do it in and meet that timeline. If you can't, tell mom, hey, I couldn't get this done. Instead of at the end, well, this and this just came up. Use that teamwork, merge together. Also, we have reframing your role as a dad. I think that's an ongoing thing, but how are we going to talk about it here today?
Yeah, I think what we've been sharing helps you shift from this idea of a helper, or a partner to co-leading the home, right? You are working collaboratively with your co-CEO of, your family Inc. to achieve sort of a vision and goals that you have together. And if you're currently not doing that, I think it will help if you take at least one step in that direction, both for the relationship as well as the benefit of you and the rest of your family. Because ultimately, this idea of shared ownership, shared awareness, shared responsibility goes back to many hands makes light work. And so I think that to me is the value of reframing your role here. And, Ed, you'll finish this off with one simple point that,
Yeah.
we're going to keep repeating.
Yeah. Small, consistent actions, big, occasional gestures. And I always say a lot of times the small things turn to be the big things, whether it's good or not good, small and consistent actions. But I love what you shared there, Drew. Shared ownership, shared awareness, shared responsibility. I think that's a beautiful term for family, for the partners. Shared ownership, shared awareness, shared responsibility. But yeah, small, consistent actions, big, occasional gestures. Good stuff. All right. So let's cover what we chatted about today, the research and reality. We also talked about what actually helps her, then what doesn't help, and then finally reframing your role as a dad. So, key takeaways today: helping isn't about effort, it's about relieving pressure. The mental load is real. The mental load is real. I'm sure many of us can say, put our hands up on that. And reducing it is one of the most powerful things you can do. And again, little actions, reducing that mental load. And being proactive builds trust, connection, and peace at home. And then finally, it isn't about perfection, it's about awareness and growth. Drew, what's our resource today?
Well, it is now live, the Connected Dad course. It is built off of our Dad's Roadmap, which is a 5-stage developmental pathway for fathers that takes you through knowing your value, knowing and regulating yourself, learning how to connect with yourself, your partner, your family, how to collaborate and coach, working together, doing exactly what we just talked about. That's stage 5. And then finally, that's stage 4. And finally, stage 5 is lead. How do you lead yourself? How do you have presence at home? And how do you model growth and consistency on a regular basis? And so this is, to me, an amazing resource. We've had fantastic feedback. We've had Dr. Fabiano give his full endorsement. And then we've had professionals who work in the field of family services review it and share their thoughts in terms of its power to positively impact fathers. So the Connected Dad course, I think that's a fantastic resource. It's now live and available for those to sign up.
Excellent. So, as always, want to say thank you so much for giving the most important thing, your time to hang out with us today. And also, if you like what you're hearing or seeing, give us a review. If you're listening, give us a review on all the podcast platforms. If you're watching on YouTube, we'd love to hear your feedback also. As always, don't just manage your time, manage your energy. Remember to give yourself grace, and we'll see you soon. Be well and keep the faith.